Hello and welcome to the Future Mobility Calculator, an electric mobility infrastructure assessment tool. Before I jump into the tool, here's some context. First, the purpose of the tool. We know transportation currently accounts for about 14% of global emissions. A key way to reduce these emissions is electrification. However, scaling electric vehicles like electric buses will require the development of a robust adoption pathway and charging infrastructure network. This is not an easy or simple task. And therefore, the Future Mobility Calculator aims to help cities make informed decisions. Hello and welcome to the Future Mobility Calculator, an electric mobility infrastructure assessment tool. Before I jump into the tool, here is why we built it. Currently, transportation accounts for about 14% of global emissions. Electrification is a key way to reduce these emissions. However, scaling electric vehicles like electric buses will require the development of a robust adoption pathway and charging infrastructure network. The Future Mobility Calculator aims to help cities make informed decisions about this adoption and plan accordingly for their future mobility and energy systems. This tool was co-developed between Siemens and the World Resources Institute. Now, a little bit more about the tool itself, what it offers and what it doesn't offer. The tool is an Excel-based tool that uses different types of city-specific inputs and a projected electric transportation uptake scenario for 2035 and 2050 across different modes, which includes electric buses, but also two-wheelers, private cars, and shared taxi fleets. The tool is not the tool does not offer quantitative analysis for EV uptake and goal setting. The tool estimates the quantity, can help estimate the quantity of infrastructure that is required for this electric vehicle adoption. However, it does not offer the local distribution grid level impacts that can occur from charging. The tool also helps quantify some emissions benefits that can be experienced in this specific adoption scenario based on the input data and listed assumptions. However, the tool is not an alternative for a cost-benefit analysis regarding electric vehicle adoption and charging infrastructure. Finally, we know that a number of cities have challenges in acquiring data that can be used in the tool. So the tool has pre-fed over 500 default data inputs from reliable sources. The tool is also an open source tool. So should you want to make changes to the default data, that is also easily possible. Finally, I want to speak a little bit about what are the inputs and the results that the tool offers. As far as the inputs, there are primarily 4 data input sheets. There is city data where the tool inputs demographic data, energy consumption data, and emissions related data. There is mobility data where we include the current mode share of the different types of vehicles, including electric buses, and uptake scenarios. What will be the growth rate of electric vehicles in the upcoming years? Projected growth rate. Charging data, types of chargers, utilization, and finally cost data, which is what is the level of public investment that is going to be needed to purchase these number of vehicles, but also the corresponding number of chargers. A number of calculations takes place with these types of inputs, and the results are showed across 3 dashboards on one sheet. The first is a cost dashboard, which shares information related to charging infrastructure estimations electricity demand estimations and vehicle investment costs that will be needed for this transition. The second dashboard is a benefits dashboard, which offers data around the social costs that has been avoided from health improvements and the emission reductions that have taken place due to EV adoption. And finally, there's an infrastructure dashboard, which outlines what the EV growth rate will be for key specific years, as well as the corresponding energy demand and the number of chargers that will be around during those specific years. Now, with that said, we'll jump to the tool demo. So here's the tool. Welcome to the Future Mobility Calculator. Once again, you will see once you download the tool, a number of tabs at the bottom, but it will start with this particular sheet, which again outlines a little bit about what the tool does. The second, in the overview sheet, it broadly describes what are the tabs, as well as offers a key to keep in mind as we move along. Basically, the key helps differentiate what is going to be the default data, gray cells, which cannot be edited. However, the cells that are highlighted in yellow are the cells where you can input your local data. In the glossary sheet, we have outlined specific definitions of terms that we use throughout the tool, as it relates to urban typology, as it relates to modes of vehicles, as it relates to the technology, different charging levels, and charging locations. As I mentioned, the tool has over 500 default inputs to help cities plan and use this tool well. So all of those sources are listed on the sources sheet. So you are able to directly see which sources have been used for the default data that is being used. Here's the first data input sheet. Now we'll jump to the data input sheet. The first is an initial data input sheet. This broadly requires your input information related to the city, as well as related to the electricity that is used in the city. Upon entering information in these yellow cells, the cells in green will automatically be updated. However, if you do not agree with the typology that the tool automatically offers, you can easily change this to a developed economy, low density, developed economy, high density, emerging economy, low density, and an emerging economy, high density. As far as the electricity information is concerned, this really looks at how quickly is the grid, which powers charging infrastructure for these vehicles, going to be clean. What is the percentage of green and clean electricity that is used on the electricity grid? And that the tool automatically buckets them, classifies them into specific areas of, well, it's still dirty, it's currently moderate, and finally that it is clean. Now jumping to the next sheet, more specific city data. As you will see here, we include information split by manual input and default input. This is going to be the format that is used across the following data sheets coming up. But in essence, manual input is where you can input local data if that is available. If it is not available, the tool automatically uses the default input data that is mentioned here. On this sheet, data that is used is across population growth. Growth rate is something that this is a crucial data point in particular. And so to the extent that this can be localized is preferred. We also include here details about the electricity mix and electricity generation emission data, as well as internal combustion engine vehicle emission factors. Now, we know a number of this information will not be available to you, and in which case, again, the default inputs help. Additionally, there are instructions provided at each step of the way, so you are aware of what is this data that is needed. Jumping to the mobility. Before I jump to the mobility data, one other thing to share. If you click on unhide sheets, there are a number of other sheets that you can see here. As it pertains to city data, city default sheet as well as the emission calculation sheet are the relevant ones. These are sheets that typically have input the default information, but also sheets where all the calculations are available. So you can see very transparently how are the final results eventually calculated. Moving now to the mobility data sheet. The mobility data sheet, as it says, includes data about mobility and requires a local input as it relates to the modal split, which is the percentage, current percentage, as well as future percentage of what the mode split will look like. Again, here, public buses features very keenly. Something that we know cities want to do as far as sustainable mobility goals are concerned is to improve public transit and increase the mode share. And this tool offers a clear visual to be able to do that. Total ICE vehicles. This is where the current mode share and fleet size in the city is input, based on which this particular percentage of the mode split is calculated. We also input the total number of EVs in the current year, because we know that EVs are already on the road. Uptake of electric vehicles. I want to specifically emphasize this piece here. This is a crucial data point for all proceeding calculations from this point onwards. While the gray cells is something that is calculated automatically, this is where scenarios can be developed of what the EV adoption rate will need to look like in 2035 and in 2050. We include, again, this particular piece has a specific focus on public buses and how that percentage can be grown. Moving on, average trip length, occupancy rate are some other aspects that we include. As it relates specifically to buses, there is bus-related data that we consider as part of the calculation. And all of this data can be collected from the transit agency. I will now move to the charging data sheet. The charging data sheet has data inputs very specific to charging infrastructure and its use. So first we look at the battery capacity of vehicles. Now this particular tool considers taxi fleets and private cars to be similar in type and size. However, it does outline differences between modes from a car to a two-wheeler to public buses. The size of the battery can be input. The charger power, we know that charging levels differ by city and by region around the world. So you are able to directly input what is the kilowatt rate of the charging infrastructure that is being used for the buses. Charging infrastructure lifespan, we consider the lifespan of the charging infrastructure as well as the charger user behavior, which is what is the percentage within a given day that the charger is being used. Again, that differs by type of vehicle, but also by location. Now we know, for instance, public buses are likely only charged at the depot. And so the default input you can see here is 100% for depots. Finally, I want to just highlight the environmental factor. Something that you would have seen earlier in the initial data input is your city considered hot or cold? And here's the description for what hot or cold means. But essentially, we know that hot and cold weather climates directly impact the range of the vehicle and the charging needs. Therefore, we include an environmental factor of default input of 1%, which is considered as part of the calculations. I will now move to the cost sheet. Costs. This particular sheet has cost input information for vehicles, for chargers, as well as for electricity transmission and consumption. The input data changes by the cost of battery size because that directly corresponds to the type of vehicle that is being used. And again, we specifically have an input here for buses. This is where the cost for those buses can be input. This is where the maintenance cost for these vehicles is input. Moving further down is the public investment. Now we know that light duty vehicles in particular are purchased by the public in general. However, city governments and national governments have a lot of incentives as well as tax breaks at this point from a public investment perspective to increase the adoption of electric vehicles. And so that can be featured here. However, buses is something that is a public vehicle by itself. And so our default inputs consider 100% of public investment for electric buses. Finally, I want to close this off by saying charging infrastructure cost is another important piece here. There are default inputs in case in your city, this is a market that is still coming up and being developed. However, if you already have information available, feel free to input them here. Finally, I will jump to the results sheet. As mentioned, there are three specific dashboards within the results sheet: the costs dashboard, the benefits dashboard, and the infrastructure dashboard. Now, the cost dashboard has information related to charging infrastructure cost, electricity cost, and vehicle investment cost. This is really useful information when it comes to planning infrastructure, as well as what the cost of this infrastructure will be to the city. So we include charging infrastructure costs based on use and the total accumulated public investment that is needed for these specific years. Electricity cost, this is by the electricity consumption that takes place for the adoption scenario that has been outlined, and the public investment that goes into that electricity consumption. Finally, the vehicle investment cost. Again, this is split by specific years and what is that total cost for each mode. And you can see specifically the bus depot is outlined in this particular case. We also consider the total accumulated public investment needed and the maintenance cost, which often gets left out in planning conversations. and decision making. Benefits dashboard, split by two, social benefits and emission reductions. Now, the social benefits have been quantified in the tool. We will note that these factors, the value of social cost is complicated, and it is something that differs greatly by the city, by the country, and by the region. However, as I mentioned, the tool does use default data where in cases where the local social cost is not available. And so this tool uses that particular data from selected years, 2035 and 2050, but also cumulative, because EV adoption will continue between the current year and 2035. So what are going to be the accumulated social cost benefits between now and 2035 and between now and 2050? Emission reductions across different types of emissions. This particular tool considers CO2, PM10, PM2.5, and NOx. Finally, I want to move to the infrastructure dashboard. The infrastructure dashboard has a variety of mobility characteristics in terms of what is the number of electric vehicles in those specific years, what are the number of internal combustion engine vehicles on those specific years, the percentage of EVs in the total fleet within the city, and corresponding growth rates that need to be achieved between now and then. Electricity consumption and chargers results as well. So how many chargers will be needed for those number of electric vehicles? What is going to be the energy demand from those chargers in those selected years, and the total energy consumption in those selected years as well. Finally, we take a stab at also sharing results within specific years, which can be helpful for policy making, for planning, and decision making. As mentioned earlier, each of these sheets have its corresponding default sheet and calculation sheet. As you will see, a mobility calculation, mobility default, charging calculations, charging default. There are a number of cost calculation sheets that can also be looked at, as well as the benefit default sheet. So all this to say, the tool is open source, it's easily accessible, and can be used as per needs of the city. I will close by saying that the tool is only as good as the data that is input in it. So the more local data that can be used in each of these data sheets, the better will be the results for planning purposes. I will also finally caveat by saying that these results are not meant to be a deep quantitative analytical assessment of the EV adoption that is expected to take place in the city, but this can be used to help guide those analysis and assessments. So we would certainly urge cities who are using this to look at the data that is offered here with the perspective of a direction, but know that further quantitative analysis will be helpful and needed to make robust decisions. With that, thank you. And please let me know if you have any questions or clarifications. You can reach me at vishant.kothari@wri.org.